conference. My apologies. Okay, Sally,
okay.
now you can talk.
Well,
go ahead.
Sure. I do the keynote in the plenary on opening night on Friday, the 3rd of this month of June, and that one is going to be addressing the latest discoveries of exoplanets. This whole recent history since the launching of the Hubble Space Telescope and the Kepler Space Telescope and the Planck Space Telescope, and what is being anticipated with the launching of the James Webb Telescope in 2018. That we have expanded the scientific community's understanding of the scope and scale of the universe, to the extent to which we have moved from the scientific community believing that there were some 100 billion stars in our Milky Way galaxy, none of which they had believed or had any affirmative conclusion had any planets around them. Now, with the launching of the Hubble telescope, they were able to expand that to know that there were 200 billion stars, but still had not been aware of any of the planets, but that they began to suspect with a few of these newly discovered 100 billion additional stars in the Milky Way galaxy, they began to notice that a number of these stars would dim in this periodic rhythm. And they began to suspect that the dimming of those distant stars that were being picked up by the Hubble might possibly because there were planets that were actually coming in their orbit between the star and the Earth. And then when they put up the Kepler was the planet hunter. And it was specifically designed to start looking for planets, predicated in part on this discovery that was being made by the Hubble. And they started to discover a number of these planets. So the first time after the launching of the Kepler Planet Hunter, they were actually able to confirm to the satisfaction of the scientific community that, yes, indeed, there were planets around a number of these stars. And the Kepler was also able to expand the number of stars that they had, quote, discovered in the Milky Way galaxy from 200 billion to 400 billion. And they anticipate with the launching of the James Webb Telescope in 2018 that it's more likely that they're going to discover that there's some 500 billion stars in our Milky Way galaxy. And that they're discovering that they believe that there are some 20% of these stars, which would now be 100 billion stars, that actually have planetary systems around them. And that of those planetary systems, they're assuming that some 25% of them have one or more planets that are in what they are calling now the Goldilocks zone, which means that the planets are not too hot or not too cold, playing off that old thing of Goldilocks with the porridge not being too hot or too cold, and that they believe that there's probably in the Milky Way galaxy, with the multiple, some of them having multiple planets in their Goldilocks zone, that there are some 50 billion planets in our Milky Way galaxy, which have planets that may well be able to sustain life. And so what's happened is that because of these discoveries, back in November of 2009, the Vatican convened a major gathering of world scientists, and they brought them to the Castel Gandolfo, just outside of Rome, which is the summer estate where the Pope lives in the summer, and that's where the Papal Observatory is. And they brought them there, and they had a whole week-long series of briefings with the top officials of the Vatican. And they, based on those discussions, then held a press conference, an official press conference in the Vatican press office in Rome, And it was chaired by Professor Jose Gabriel Funes, who was the director of the Papal Observatory. And Jesuit Father Funes announced that based upon the discoveries that were being made of more and more of these exoplanets, and more of them unto an amount of 50 billion of them that they thought were capable of potentially sustaining life, that the time had arrived when now it was very likely, quote them, very likely that our human family was going to be discovering the existence of life elsewhere in the universe much sooner than anyone had previously anticipated. And therefore, the time had arrived for the beginning of a very serious discussion of the profound philosophical and theological questions that are going to be posed to our human family by the discovery of life elsewhere in the universe. Now, unquote. Now, in light of the fact that I served for 10 years as a Jesuit candidate for the priesthood and as their chief legal counsel at the United States Jesuit headquarters in Washington, D.C., and the co-director of their social ministry office, that what I did is in that capacity, I reached out to Father Funes, and I went to Rome and met with him and discussed this serious discussion that he proposed to begin right away. And it didn't take more than 5 minutes for us both to acknowledge that he wasn't talking about just microbiotic life, on some distant moon beneath a sea of ice and methane or something. He was talking about another potential highly intelligent, highly technologically developed, but distinctly non-human, sentient species. And so this is the kicker. This is the one that the human family has been anticipating. And, that there's been, and there has been for at least 70 years now, some very intense conversations going on among our human family, beginning soon before and then immediately thereafter, after the famous Roswell incident in July of 1947. And that there have been numerous sightings of what people consider to be unidentified flying objects, and there has been much speculation about their coming from some extraterrestrial civilization. And this was followed by numerous reports of direct face-to-face encounters with extraterrestrial beings in the so-called close encounters of a third kind. And then there are photographs and there are videotapes and everything of these. But the Vatican did not address any of that evidence. What they're doing is taking a very different position, saying that based strictly upon the discovery of more and more of these planets and the ability of our scientific community to discern atmosphere around these planets, and now with the major telescope that has been put out in the desert, out in Chile, that there's a major telescope that it has a lens on it that can filter out the brightness of the suns, those stars, and they believe they can actually see the planets as they come through their orbit out around to the side of those stars. And with the computers, since they can put the satellites or the space-based telescopes in a stationary position outside our Earth, they can focus on such a star for weeks, indeed months at a time, without any motion whatsoever and any interference from the atmosphere of the planet. So they can actually draw down data from the surface of the planets as they are orbiting around the star. And they're going to be able to put that data through computers and then generate computer images of the surface of these planets and run the data from their atmosphere through a spectroscope and tell what the actual chemical components are of their atmosphere to be able to locate planets that have atmospheres very similar to those on our Earth, and they can start to search for evidence of life on those planets. So this this quest that we're engaged in for the discovery of extraterrestrial intelligence, this is actually the theme of the first talk I'm going to be doing is called The Fascination with UFOs in the Existence of Extraterrestrial Intelligence and the Human Quest for Transcendence.
Wow.
The point is that this confronts people with what they view to be a religious encounter, and the reason for that is that religion, the Latin root for religion is relegare, which is to relink, to hook our human consciousness back into unity with the entire universe that we have separated ourselves from through the exercise of our intellect. With the evolution of intelligence and the intellect in human beings, somewhere between Australopithecus and Homo erectus, this further development of the synapses in the brain have caused us to the Latin root for intellect is intellectus, which means the ability to distinguish the difference between. And our intellect is our ability to distinguish the difference between ourselves and the rest of the universe. And what it has done is it has generated a concomitant anxiety and a separation anxiety, this ultimate existential angst, this sense that we're alone in the universe, that we're separate and apart from all the stars that surround us, etc., and that the religious experience is one of transcendence, the ascending out and apart from our sense of separateness back into unity with the universe. So that this quest for the other beings in the universe is in part a substantial part of the quest for transcendence on the part of our human family. And we believe, and I've written a number of different places about, that we're not searching simply for another intelligent species. We're searching for another species that has the same basic metaphysical capabilities as our human family has of transcending separateness and having what is basically a spiritual experience, a unitive experience of the sum total of the entire universe, so that they can transcend an antagonistic, dialectical, or confrontational primary relationship with other beings. That's the people that we're looking for. And if we can find these people and join in community with them, or these beings, that we believe that we can establish a peaceful and coexistent relationship with these beings, and they can help us, explore the stars. Anyway, that's what I'm going to be talking about.
You could, with that final part of what you just said, you could be teaching one of my Tantra classes. Because we come to experience our, move beyond our skin encapsulated self-sense, activating our Kundalini energy and activating our chakras and moving into unity consciousness and away from that negative separation. And you start with the parent, other one person, and you move to your family, your group, your community, your country, your world, your galaxy, your universe. So fascinating. I love how you tied it all up in a neat bow there, and I'm just excited to come and listen to your. It sounds like you've done a lot of study, investigation, reflection, because not all UFO exopolitics investigators and authors come to these type of high spiritual conclusions. There's a few I can name, but I won't name them. But I love how you're going the whole spectrum instead of just saying nuts and bolts and
that's right. That's what this is about. There are more prosaic issues involved, of course, of being able to discover what type of technologies they have that might enable us to address the issues of global climate change and alternative sources of non-polluting energy, other kinds of health benefits that we might be able to obtain from them. But there are a whole series of reasons why people would be interested in this subject. But this, I think, is the kind of overarching, all-important issue that underlies the fascination with UFOs and extraterrestrial intelligence?
Okay, I'm going to pass the talking stick to Karen. John, who wants to go first? We'll go boy, girl, boy. John, you want to go first?
Go ahead. Go ahead, Karen, because I did the bio intro.
Okay. Yeah, Karen, we haven't heard from you yet. Karen, are you there? Oh, did we lose her? Okay, John, go ahead. I'll look and see what happened to Karen. Here she is.
Very.
Hold on.
Okay.
Hold on. She must have bumped off and came back on. Let me just turn her back on.
Yeah,
I just turn people off and on.
I fell to the invisible trapdoor. Yeah. Gosh, it was a great introduction. I was just riveted. You went totally in a different direction than I thought. You were so nuts and bolts, and then you went consciousness level, and that was amazing how you took that turn. I'm kind of curious because, first of all, I've been kind of impressed with the Catholic Church's acumen in the sciences. I learned some of that from a relative who was a physics. He was a Jesuit administrator, or priest, and he was also a physics teacher. And so I learned how much resourcing that they've put. You wouldn't expect, in a religious organization to have that tremendous amount of scientific, capability, including their own satellites and everything. But I was wondering, and I know they've made some astonishingly interesting, pronouncements that they, in fact, do entertain the idea that there is extraterrestrial intelligent life, and that they anticipate a peaceful, interaction with them. And I was wondering if this show on Friday night, typically we're talking about the experience or phenomenon, the abductees, contactees, what have you. And I was just wondering if they've looked into this sociologically, because this is, for us, a big next step is the fact that we acknowledge that those intelligences have already contacted regular rank-and-file human beings. So I was kind of curious if you had a beat on what their plan was, or what were they doing to kind of understand people who've been contactees and abductees.
Well, this is a second category from the discussion we're going to be having on Friday night, which has to do with the issue of the human quest for transcendence and the fascination with UFOs that is basically following the pathway with the exoplanets. But there, as I said, there's an entire body of information about the contacts here on the planet, and so you have to shift gears basically to move from the exploration of the exoplanets and the potential life there, step by step, of finding more and more and more complex life as you move out into the universe or into the galaxy. But then when you come back home, you have the entire corpus of data of the contacts and videotapes and photographs and things that have been going on. And of course, the aspect of all of that becomes the most fascinating of all of that, basically, is this question of the contact with extraterrestrial beings in some type of experiments that seem to be going on. The multiple reports of some sort of what appears to be sort of a genetic engineering program of some kind going on. Women being abducted and them recalling that they have been subjected to the extraction of egg cells and later being introduced to babies that appear to be a hybrid of them and an extraterrestrial species. Now, this confronts a trial lawyer, such as myself, a 45-year trial lawyer, with all of the same kind of questions that one encounters in the course of preparing a case, which has to do with the credibility of the particular witnesses, whether or not there are secondary witnesses who can attest to the same set of facts, whether there's any empirical evidence to support what it is that they're saying. Are there other witnesses who have had very similar accounts that clearly have had no communication with each other that can reinforce each other's information? There's a whole series of questions that need to be posed. Now, I have met I've had the great fortune, as you probably know, I was the attorney for Dr. John Mack at Harvard University back in 1994, when Dr. Mack, the head of the life sciences and psychiatric facilities at Harvard Medical School, he in fact wrote a book called Abductions, Human Encounters with Aliens. And he set forth in the book several accounts, numerous accounts of persons whom he had interviewed at great length, and had given to him full accounts of their having had, of being certain that they had had such an experience. And he ended up studying these types of experiences that the people had, and ended up writing a major article for the New England Journal of Medicine, which is sort of the gold standard of peer-reviewed journals for the medical field, and they refused to publish it. And he became upset about that and published it as a book. And then he was confronted by the faculty at Harvard University and pulled in front of an ad hoc faculty committee and basically chastised for what he had done. And he ended up retaining me as his attorney because I had graduated from Harvard College and Harvard Law School and had attended Harvard Divinity School and was familiar with this issue of alternative worldviews. And Dr. Mack had become convinced that what the problem was he was having at Harvard University is that Harvard University was the proponent of the classic scientific, logical, positivist worldview, a radically materialist worldview, and that this UFO phenomena and the ET phenomena didn't seem to comport with the fourth paradigm scientific, logical, positivist worldview, that there were too many things going on that seemed to be abnormal. The ability of these vehicles to be traveling at super high rates of speed and then turn direct 90-degree angles, and that no human being or any being that is a material being that we know of could physically survive movements like that. And a whole series of details that were given by the people they interviewed that made it perfectly evident that that they believed they were having an encounter with an extraterrestrial being. And so I was his attorney, and in that context, once we won that case and stood down that inquisition against him, that I became legal counsel for PEER, which John Mack founded, called the Project for Extraordinary Experience Research. And in that context, I got to meet many, many, many dozens of people who gave these accounts of these direct face-to-face encounters with extraterrestrial beings, some of whom gave accounts similar to the one I referred to of women being abducted and remembering egg cells being taken from them. And one of them, a woman of Karen, being later introduced to a child that was clearly a hybrid between the extraterrestrials and human beings that she knew was her daughter from that egg cell. And so I've had an opportunity to interview literally hundreds of people who have purported to have had these experiences. Some of them I have become convinced are delusional, that it's not true, that they wanted to be part of this extraordinary phenomenon going on and they'd made it up, and whether they'd convinced themselves or not, the fact is that I didn't credit their stories. Others, however, I was convinced that they were completely sincere and genuine in their accounts of what it is that they were perfectly certain had happened to them. Then there's the whole field of people that, 99% of us that are fascinated by these subjects of UFOs and extraterrestrial intelligence who have never had any kind of a direct face-to-face experience with any extraterrestrial being. Yet we have become convinced, based upon the experiences and accounts of others, that this is actually occurring. And then there are a whole group of people who are just acting in bad faith, that have made this up, that they haven't even deluded themselves into believing it's true. They're just making it up because they're either pranksters or people that are trying to get in on fame or something. But the bottom line is that that I've also become convinced that there is an entirely other category of people that are involved in the military intelligence community that are engaged in attempting to deceive people into believing that they're having encounters with a UFO or an extraterrestrial being, and that it's some kind of a propaganda program, that this so-called My Labs program. So there's a half a dozen different categories of people that are involved in this entire area, and then you have the additional dimension of this, which I delivered an entire seminar on this at the International UFO Congress, is that when people do encounter this issue of UFOs and extraterrestrial intelligence, that they prism all of the information that they get through their own worldview, and that there's an entire octave of human worldviews, that the political manifestation of which, or the political theory that is derivative of their philosophy, that range all the way from the extreme right wing of authoritarians, moving step by step to the left on the political spectrum, from authoritarians to reactionaries to conservatives to moderates to liberals to progressives to utopianists. Each of the people within those worldview groups perceive the entire issue of UFOs and ETs through the prism of their own worldview. And so the way they react to this particular phenomenon is completely dictated by the worldview that they adhere to. So we get people who are authoritarians, trying to figure out how they can maintain their authority on the earth and over everybody else if there's this other extraordinarily sophisticated and highly technologically developed civilization interacting with us. They're trying to figure out how they can establish contact with that species and bolster their own power. The others who are conservative, who are reactionaries, who see the whole world in terms of good and bad and black and white and good guys and bad guys, they perceive the potential extraterrestrial beings as being ultimate bad guys. And so that they're just spinning out all of these fictions of them coming to the earth and attacking our earth and unto eating us, and that entire projection onto the phenomenon. And on the other end of the spectrum, there are utopianists that happen to believe that these beings are ultimately angels, the same thing that exists as angels in the mythology of the human family, in that they're all sent by some infinite intelligence that are sent here to help us, to help save us, to help prevent global climate change, to help us eliminate nuclear weapons, so that you see that the issue is complicated by this distorted perception that people have of the phenomenon. So I've become very familiar with all of that and the attitudes and beliefs of all the different constituencies, and how to deal with all of the different constituencies that are in the UFO field, from good faith actors to bad faith actors. So I've spent ever since 1977, when I was contacted by Marcia Smith, the head of the Science and Technology Division of the United States Library of Congress Congressional Research Service, to participate in the top secret study that President Carter wanted conducted of the issue of UFOs. So I've been involved in this field since 1977, but prior to that, like most everybody who's listening here today, when I was old enough to sit out in the yard at night in the summertime and look up into the sky and see the billions of stars, I've been completely fascinated by what it is that's going on all around us. But I wasn't professionally involved in it directly and in a unique way until 1977. But ever since then, I've been now for some 40 years, as of next year, 40 years I've been involved professionally in the field as an attorney and as an investigator, and I've been legal counsel and am legal counsel for the Disclosure Project. We had a session of the Disclosure Project in 2001. in the summer of 2001 that Dr. Stephen Greer put together, and I was legal counsel for the Citizens Conference on UFO stuff that Steve Bassett put together a couple of years ago. And so I've been involved legally as one of the principal attorneys and political experts that have been involved in this entire field. So that's what my experience has been.
Thank you.
Danny, I'm an experiencer, and I've been having contact since the crib. And I've been in contact with many, endless, numerous species. And it's just very complicated. There's people that want to categorize them as good or bad. It's just like human beings. There's all different personalities out there. So my husband was a colleague of John Mack's, and they studied with, what's his name, Stan Groff. They were in the
Stanislav, yeah.
programs. Yeah, so my husband's Dr. Sasha Lesson, and he was there back in I guess it was the 80s, early 80s, early to mid-80s, and John was starting to get more and more clients coming in with these stories, and Stan Groff and the holotropic breathwork, they were encountering contactee, extraterrestrial type experiences as well. Some people were using entheogens, and some people were just using holotropic breathwork. So I just wanted to comment on that. Oh, when I told John I had a MyLab type encounter with, several species of extraterrestrials and the military. This was late, probably 1998 or 9. Might have been 2000. Anyway, he at that time said, I really don't want to discuss those type of experiences yet. And that's kind of like changed over time. People are now addressing the MyLab type experiences. I, too, had a very major military connection when I was on a military base with the extraterrestrials. So I haven't quite written that in my book yet, but I'm going to bring that out. Anyway, so I just want to put that on the table there. Any comments from you or the other two people, John and Karen? But Candy, go ahead, you first, because we're running out of time.
Well, no, I mean that as you might imagine, I've been told this by 100 different people, and some people are telling the truth, some people aren't telling the truth. There's no way to tell just by the fact that someone tells you that. Now, everybody, of course, is equally offended by that. If they say, well, I just got through telling you it was true, and they anticipate that one is just going to automatically believe them or just automatically not believe them, I don't believe either one of those responses is appropriate, that one has to, discuss it with people, subject it to examination and et cetera. So my response is always that that's extremely interesting, and that we would have to talk in more detail before I'd be able to make a determination of whether it's true or not. And even the fact that people are completely sincere and they believe that they've had the experiences doesn't necessarily tell you whether they have or haven't. So
it's very complicated because we have mind control projections, we have all these experiences, and if somebody is making up, they may believe it, and all the distance is rather subjective when you look at it that way. What my husband, Dr. Lesson, who is a anthropologist and a psychotherapist, says, if they're making it up, where are they making it up from? I mean, so they are bored and said that we're pulling it down from some level, that everything that is, was, and ever will be already exists. So they're just tapping on, kind of like everything's floating in the cosmos, and they're just tapping on to something because it's probably relevant and to their lives, their personal lives. If you look at it this way, like it's a holotropic universe and everything it just does exist, and we can basically select a timeline or a multiverse, which is what I was shown when I was 4 on a mothership, and I was my eternal self and not just a 4-year-old. I was into who I am as an eternal being. It's that we are the choosers, and where do we want to go? So can we find a timeline multiverse which serves all to the best, highest good? Right now we seem to be on one that really just respects those at the top, and the rest of us are, dog meat, we're just slaves to the corporate elite. So what are your thoughts on that? I mean, I'm just putting that on the table.
Well, I just spent an hour this morning with Gary Knoll on his radio show out of New York. He is doing a major 4-part series called The Masters of Wealth, in which he's analyzing the power elite. And I teach an entire course on that at the University of California here at Santa Cruz about the power elite and the role that they have. And so that is a sort of a entirely different and distinct issue that we need to talk about other times, and that is this configuration of our form of self-government within our own species on this one planet. And people tend to conflate these issues, thinking that, again, somehow the extraterrestrial beings are going to somehow pass judgment on this kind of strange form of self-government that we have, of allowing less than 1% of the population to dictate, virtually all of the policies, both international policies and domestic policies of the different nation states that we have, to say nothing about the peculiar process of dividing our planet into nation states. That there's one of the issues that the issue of UFOs and extraterrestrial intelligence brings to our human family is a very important one, and that is the issue of perspective. Because if, in fact, you sit in the yard at night, on a nice June night coming up and look into the stars, you start to immediately be rather thunderstruck by the peculiar way in which we conduct ourselves. Of drawing lines between certain areas of a continent, and if the people on one side of the line step over the other side of the line, then that they will shoot hot lead into each other's body. And then other people, kill each other over silly things other than just land, but access to water or any of that stuff. What we're doing is we're projecting onto an extraterrestrial civilization the assumption that they would look upon us with from a perspective that made us look like we were imbeciles, or crazy or demented in some way, and so that we're concerned that they might hold us in comparatively low regard. But the reality is that we should hold ourselves in low regard if we act like that, and that we should find within our own consciousness the higher levels of our own consciousness, from the perspective of which we could help each other refrain from those kind of strange activities. So that is another one of the roles that the issue of the UFOs and extraterrestrial intelligence plays. It is a certain kind of looking from above perspective on our human family, giving us some kind of a motive to correct our incorrect conduct toward each other. So that's a very important thing for me, because I believe that it was that perspective of sitting and looking at the stars and trying to understand what it is that they would think about us if they were looking down on us. And what this does is it begins to fulfill the same role that the gods used to play, or God, a monotheistic deity, plays in human culture. It's a consciousness that is apart and separate from our conditioned, culturally engaged lower consciousnesses. That it's a phantasm that has been projected by our human family out into a perspective looking at us, which provides a mode of ethical reasoning that can be used to help discipline ourselves. So that's why many people think about the issue of extraterrestrial intelligence in the same vein that they think about God, in that they think about the gods in ancient Greece and Rome. So this is an additional psychological layer, if you will, of this particular issue.
Well, I remember seeing you on the video honoring Zechariah Sitchin. My husband was in there as one of the people who was being interviewed at that conference. Where was that? I forget where that was. That was the first occasion program of Zechariah Sitchin, and they were interviewing everybody out in the corridor there. And my husband was kind of new to the field, and the Prophets Conference. Remember, they were ones that sponsored. You were there anyway. You were there. You were on the video, Jennifer Stein. Mm-hmm. So what do you think of the Zechariah Sitchin, Lawrence Gardner, Anunnaki perspective? For me, looking at the archetype of the Anunnaki gives us an out-of-the-box perspective as well, the gods and maybe the attitudes and thoughts around the human perspective in both ways, them looking at us and us looking at them. So I use that archetype and the Star Trek archetype to raise out of the box and go, okay, here's where we can go. And I love the Lost Book of Enki. That seems to be the epitome of what Sitchin was trying to say. And he rather identified with that, with Enki. He strongly identified with Enki. So what do you think about the Anunnaki perspective?
Yeah, well, I have a kind of a unique perspective on this because Zechariah Sitchin asked me to be his lawyer. He got very upset about the people that had done the movie and television series about the Stargate, and he contacted me and he wanted to sue them for stealing his information. And I sat down with Zechariah. I said, Zechariah, wait a second here. I mean, this is not your information. I mean that according to you, what you've done is you have translated these ancient Sumerian tablets, and that you have written the books, the dozen books or so on this, and you have translated it, providing your expertise to the people of the world, saying, look, based on your expert familiarity with the language of ancient Sumerian, the voice in which these records are being kept are the same voice that was used to report accurate factual information, and that there are completely different voices in context that they use to report just mythological things. And so therefore you're lending extreme credibility to these translations that you're putting out, asserting that you see these as being accounts of factual information. And so therefore, this is not you. This is not your story. You didn't make it up. You didn't, this isn't a creation of yours. So you have no possessory interest in this. And he finally ended up understanding that. And so that my relationship with Zechariah in his books is, that this is an account that the people of the time wrote down, asserting that the Sumerians were aware of this particular history of the Anunnaki and their origins in South Africa, the generation of a genetically engineered species that was engineered from forms of Homo erectus that really explained the linkage between Homo erectus and Homo sapien. Now, that's a credibility question. It's a question of having access to those plates, determining whether the plates are completely original and valid, whether or not the translations of them are valid, whether it's some kind of complete mythology that was an accounting of the people of that time, of the Sumerian people, whether or not Zechariah is accurate with regard to saying that it is written in the unique voice of the language that is recounting factual information. But if you turn from that question, kind of a legalistic question about the whole thing, and you look at what it is that's being said, one of the principal challenges of this is that the allegations about the planet coming in from this 3,200 year elliptical orbit that it professes in the writings to be going on, that the Anunnaki come in on this planet that has this big, long 3,200 year orbit, in that they only come into the near space around our planet, twice every 3,200 years, one on the way in, as it were, and one on the way out. I got John Mack to put me in touch with the head of the Harvard Observatory, and had him undertake a special scan of the skies, because that every time you talk to somebody originally about this writings of Zecharia Sitchin, they always end up starting to tell you that, Nibiru is on its way right now, and that Nibiru is going to be here in 4, 3, 5, 6 years. There's this metaphorical kind of importance that this issue of Nibiru has taken on within the UFO community, in which their kind of wishful thinking is projecting onto this data to think that Nibiru is on its way in, and we're going to, in that all of these sightings that we've been having over the last 70 years or so since Roswell, this rapidly increasing amount of sightings is evidence that Nibiru is approaching us, and that the ships are coming from Nibiru, and so that we're on the brink of being visited once again by these Anunnaki. That the laboratory, the observatory, was unable to find any evidence of that. Scanning the skies, they did not see anything that seemed to be resembling such a planet approaching us. So that's all I know about that. And one would think that a set of data or story that was so incredibly elaborate as that which was put down on the tablets by the Sumerian people, you would think that there'd be no reason for them to make that up. But the fact of the matter is, we've all encountered, especially in this community, elaborate hoaxes. And just look at Star Trek itself. Look at Star Trek itself. I mean, there are thousands of people in the United States who spend virtually all of their time familiarizing themselves with virtually every detail of Star Trek, and that they have volumes that they write about the different planets that were discovered, about what goes on at the Starfleet Academy, what do the courses look like at the Starfleet Academy. There's an entire subculture that they have spent thousands of man hours.
You might say the same is true of the Bible and religion.
Well, no.
There are
you can do that.
Subcultures of anything like that. There's Star Wars people, and Star Trek people, and religious people, and
Game of Thrones people.
There's no Game of Thrones. There's no the truth. There are these realities, and people can live their entire lives in these realities, and they're every bit as real to them as somebody else's reality.
Well, only if they lose track of themselves. I mean, that once they start down a road of doing that, that's one of the other problems we encounter in the UFO community, is they spend a lot of time creating a world like that, and they finally end up falling into it and end up losing perspective and actually believe that it's true. That L. Ron Hubbard was a classic example of that. L. Ron Hubbard spent years writing science fiction books, and he finally just clicked some kind of a switch and started convincing himself that this was true, and that therefore he must be somehow channeling this or downloading this from some other source, and ended up just being convinced it was true. But yet the first several books that he wrote, he was very conscious of the fact that these were science fiction, until he finally ended up telling himself that this must be being channeled from somewhere, and that it was all true. Now, that's a challenge that we have inside the UFO community because of it's being conflated with the human quest for transcendence. You know, that the people find it to be such a beguiling and entrancing world that they just shift over into it because they're so unhappy with the world the way it is. And so that they just think there must be a better world, and if I'm unable to find it, I'll make it up myself. And so they go ahead and do that.
And that's why what happened with Joseph Smith and other people. You know, we're looking through time. And, you know, there's something that happens, and so who can interpret somebody else's reality? Actually, so maybe we need to stop doing that and just look at what will work for everybody. I'm totally fine with.
Well, no, you said that about 4 times now. So I think I need to address that. You know, that you have to be careful of becoming what is known as an aimless relativist. An aimless relativist is a person who believes that whatever anybody else believes is just as good as whatever somebody else believes, and that just isn't true. I mean, the fact of the matter is that
there are basic things. Are you hurting yourself or are you harming others? I think there's a hymn, you know, practice no harm. What is, you know, harmful?
Well, that's an ethical concern. I'm talking about objective reality. That you know, even though one becomes an expert on Plato in the realm of the forms and all the way to the point of understanding quantum physics and the direct relationship between directed human intentionality on inchoate quantum fields, you know, there's a whole range of subjects that are relevant to this thing. But the reality is that you know, at the very highest levels of mystical traditions in Buddhism and Hinduism, et cetera, on our planet, you know, they maintain that none of this is real. That everything that we believe we are experiencing here in the material realm is in fact a delusion. It is a dream. You know, but the fact of the matter is, I'm not a radical scientific logical positivist or a strict materialist, but the reality is that all of us who have met each other, you know, 3, 4, 5, 6 times over periods at different events down through the years, we understand that just because someone is not in our direct vision, it doesn't mean that they don't exist. It doesn't mean that you are a figment of my imagination. You know, that you know perfectly well that you exist. I may be able to, if I were following this aimless relativist tradition, think that, oh, well, here's this illusion again, that I'm talking with Janet. You know, that, Janet must just be a figment of my imagination. You know that's not true. Okay? Right. And so I know that I'm not a figment of your imagination, and I've gone beyond that to assume that we are not figments of each other's imagination, that there is in fact a referential reality that obtains. Now that is important for us, because those of us who are devoted to trying to keep us from destroying ourselves, either with thermonuclear weapons or with the building of private nuclear reactors right on the seacoasts all around the world, as global climate change is generating a rise in the global mean sea levels, you know, that we're going to have, you know, 402 of these Fukushima events with them going underwater, you know, or killing ourselves through a global climate change to the point where we generate so much CO2 and methane into the atmosphere that we raise the global mean temperature to the point of thawing out all the permafrost areas of the planet and allow 50 megaton plumes of methane to go up into the atmosphere and kill ourselves. You know, I mean, there are things that we can do to ourselves if we don't have an adequate grasp on reality, and so that I'm an advocate of our being realistic about what the nature of reality is, and not getting too carried away about this. And so I sort of, in a sense, hold down that position with many others inside the UFO community, So that just when a person starts thinking that they're picking up signals from extraterrestrial beings on their molars, that one has to be careful about that, because some people become genuinely delusional about that. And so that we have to be very careful in making evaluations as to whose data we use to determine what this phenomenon is that we're encountering with UFOs and extraterrestrial beings.
Well, that's absolutely fascinating, and we're out of time. So, Danny, one final minute with you. John, Karen, thank you. I'm sorry we didn't get back to you, but we'll have to have you back again, Danny. This is incredible. What would you like to say to our listeners before we bring on the next person?
Well, I'll see you at one or another of the conferences, either Contact in the Desert or at the International UFO Congress or at Paola Harris's annual gatherings in Laughlin or the Alien Cosmo Expo. That in the midst of my doing legal cases and trials and teaching constitutional law and stuff at the University of California, I get to go to these gatherings of all of our people, and so I look forward to seeing everyone who is listening sooner or later at one of these conferences.
And that's it. Thank you. Yes, we will see you, Danny. And Karen and John, hang on. I'm going to play a couple commercials, and we will be back with, what's his name? Karen, John, what's our second?
Brad.
Brad Olson.
Brad
Olson.
Olson.
Okay. So we'll be right back. Thank you, Danny. What's to the table? And you're presenting at what? Contact in the Desert next week? Is that?
That's right. Yeah.
Or are you at Alien Cosmic Expo as well, or just Contact in the Desert?
This time around, just Contact, but hopefully
all right.
they'll like what they hear, and maybe I'll get invited to start doing those expos. But
okay,
so yeah, I mean, I live in San Francisco. Where you guys are in Hawaii, right?
I'm in Hawaii. John, tell Brad where you are.
I'm Reverend John Polk. I'm Reverend John Polk. I reside just outside of Universal Studios in Orlando, Florida.
All right. Well, we got a little triangle going between the three of us then.
No, there's a four.
There's a knee.
We have four.
Make it a square.
Yeah, my name's Karen Christine Patrick. I live in New Mexico. I'm about 3 hours out of Roswell, the Mecca of UFOs. So there you go.
Nice.
Nice.
Well represented panel here.
Yes. So tell us more about yourself and your work. Our listeners are just waiting to hear.
Sure. Listen, well, that was a great setup piece. I appreciate that a lot. And I produce a How Weird Street Fair part-time. We just got done on May 1st, so that's kind of into hibernation. And I'm back full-time year-round with CCC Publishing and the authors that I publish, including Leo Lyon Zagami, whose book Confessions of an Illuminati Volume 2 just came out through CCC Publishing, and my own second edition of Future Esoteric, The Unseen Realms, also just came out, and I think that's what we're slated to talk about here on this show.
Wonderful. Where do you want to start? What's your burning share that you want to start with right now?
Well, I guess just another little setup piece for your listeners is I originally grew up in Chicago and self-financed a 3-year trip around the world, and that's when I got started in travel writing. My first book is called World Stompers, a global travel manifesto, kind of how-to book for budding young travelers who want to go abroad for maybe months or years at a time. And that's what I did. I taught English in Japan and made enough money to self-finance a 3-year trip around the world. And it was really an incredible learning experience, and found myself drawn to the sacred places naturally as any long-term traveler would. And that led to my Sacred Places series of books, which are also still unpublished and doing quite well. And then some of the mysteries of those sacred places, I'll give you an example. I went to the Great Pyramids on a full moon in March 93 and actually had snuck up and got to the top of the Great Pyramid and had a bit of an epiphany moment up there and sort of set me on my track to land out here in the West Coast. And it was something about those pyramids, something about the incredible monuments you see around the world. There's more story to be told, and I covered them quite in depth in my Sacred Places guides. But, for example, the Great Pyramid just had more of a story to be told, and so then I switched over to writing about esoteric subjects, and that is the nature of my 2 books in the series so far. Modern Esoteric, which is looking all the way back to the antediluvian civilizations and then coming up through history with the secret societies and the mystery schools and so much more that we have learned to this modern day. And then Future Esoteric takes a more forward-looking view and gets into the ET and UFO issue. And it's that book, Future Esoteric, that got me asked to be a speaker at Contact in the Desert next week.
Okay. I want to pass the talking stick around so our co-host here can ask you questions that you just evoked a million questions for me, but I would take up a lot of airtime. So let's hear from Karen.
I'm going to pass the stick to John because we hardly heard from John last hour, and I know that John knows a lot about Brad. So
okay.
Go for it, John, and catch you later.
Hey, Brad, I'm a huge fan of Ancient Aliens, and I've watched every single episode. I've recorded every single episode. I watch them over and over and over again, especially when they relate to shows that we're going to do collectively as a team, and especially somebody like you who's been on the show. But one thing I wanted to talk about was the island of Pompeii and Non-Madal.
Yeah,
the city of ghosts. And I remember you explained something about how those was it the basalt pillars, how they stacked them and how they moved them, and you used the term auditive levitation, which if you match the sound frequency of matter, you can render an object weightless.
That's right.
Can you explain that? I mean, I get the basic parameters of it, but can you explain that so that we can all understand that concept better?
Absolutely. It's a great question, John. Well, think about how an opera singer can shatter a wine glass through midair.
Ooh.
So that's already auditive restructuring of the atomic piece that she breaks apart. And we know that wavelengths and frequencies and vibrations have a very real effect on the material world. So as it relates to Non-Madal, and just to give a little more background, there's this incredible part of the island. It's actually a little separate island just off the main island, Pohnpei. And on one side of it, on top of a shallow reef, are dozens of these Lincoln log type stacked buildings, enclosures on 4 sides with entranceways and sometimes windows and sometimes little passageways down into the ground that do exit out sometimes on the reef. So it has like an underwater characteristic, and these above ground giant megalithic basalt logs stacked so expertly on top of each other is just one of the true enigmas of the ancient world. And even the villagers who it was presumed were the builders stay away from there. As you said, it's a haunted place, and generally the locals don't like even going there, and they certainly won't spend a night there. But a lot of Westerners love to go there. Yeah. But to answer your question about auditive levitation, I use an example in Future Esoteric in a chapter called The Secret Sciences, where a Swedish doctor named Dr. Jarl knew some Tibetan monks, and one of the High Lamas had been sick out in Tibet, and they summoned him to come out from Sweden, which he did. And he spent some time with these people, and he used some Western medicine, which they were appreciative of, I think antibiotics, and helped out the High Lama. And since he was did such a good thing for them and befriended them, they said, well, we're going to take you out and show you a few things that we do. And he was an artist, and he drew some diagrams, which I reprint in Future Esoteric, whereas the 3 lines of monks surrounded a giant boulder. One of the lines were drummers, another line were trumpeters, and the mass majority in the back were the rest of the monks from the monastery who were chanting. And they got this rhythm going, and it became a very loud cacophony of sound, and all of their attention then shifted upwards. And right when it did, in this cacophony of sound, the boulder levitated, and it went up, and then it went over to a cliffside, and some other monks were collecting the boulders and building a wall. He was so astonished when he saw this that he did some research on it and published some work. Unfortunately, it has not been lost, but it's just an example how auditive levitation can be utilized if you understand frequencies and vibrations. And that's indeed what Nikola Tesla said: if you want to understand the mechanisms of the universe, study frequencies and vibration.
Okay, thank you. That was great.
I'd like to chime in here. Have you seen the videos of John Hutchinson's work, the Hutchinson effect? Because basically he was using technology to utilize some of this frequency and vibration energy to melt metal. There's video of him levitating a metal ball and tools and such. So basically you can get there from this meditative acoustical effect that the monks were using, but also it appears that if you can get those, effects with sound and vibration through technology, some of those same effects kind of appear. So is that something you were familiar with?
Yes, indeed, and that's when it starts to tie into anti-gravity and anti-gravitics, the science behind anti-gravity. And very much so. You can go on the internet right now and find videos of bowling balls levitating, of frogs which are alive and squirming around while they're floating in midair, and other things. And this technology has been around for decades. Unfortunately, it's one of those that gets sequestered in these black projects and not released to the general public, because it could do a lot of good. It would revolutionize transportation for one, but perhaps also open the door to free energy, and that's why I suspect it's been one of these secret sciences that have been actively suppressed for decades, if not longer.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I say, I've seen quite a few UFOs. I've never seen a tailpipe with, fuel fumes belching out the back. They're and, they can do things that would really be hard to do in any of our craft, like 90-degree turns. I've seen that a couple of times, and that would just be, if they didn't have their kind of own bubble of reality that's separate from ours, the inertia would pretty much squish the occupants up against the wall. Or toss them out of the chairs, as we famously see in Star Trek. But so basically, they've got some other, making some kind of bubble of reality that's a bit different than our gravitational forces and whatnot. That allows the, obviously this is how advanced cultures who aren't hung up on using fuel transport them. And we're kind of at a point where they're really pushing hard for us to understand that. I mean, all kinds of people are getting all kinds of downloads and, of course, seeing UFOs. And once you've seen that, it works in your brain. Like I saw a star tetrahedron-shaped craft that was totally silent, going faster than a jet plane. And this is in 1979. It was absolutely not aerodynamic in any way that I could understand it. And that just stuck in my brain for a long time going, what? It defied my understanding of everything I knew about physics, and that's going all the way back. I mean, this is just a modern phenomenon. It goes all the way back. So, that's great.
The idea that this is ancient technology, absolutely right. And along the same lines of auditive levitation and levitating heavy objects, there's this site down in southern Florida, Homestead, Florida, just inland from Miami, called the Coral Castle, and it's the only modern megalithic site built in the last 100 years. And it was this little spindly guy from Latvia, his name was Edley Scalin, and he would quarry these giant megalithic stones right next to his property. He would work alone every night, and then in the morning you'd see another giant slab stacked upon another slab. And the only clue he would give is he said he knew the secrets of the ancient Egyptians. And some kids spied on him one time and were watching him. He would never allow anybody to watch him, but these kids got away with it. And they said he had some kind of wand. And this is also reminiscent of what people say the gray aliens use to subside abduction victims, basically, and is a way of rendering them not only unconscious or unmovable, but also to levitate their bodies, sometimes with the tractor beams and coming up to the craft, and then they would use it in various ways too, witnesses have said, during abduction recalls.
Hi, Janet here. A couple things came up for me while I was going in the direction you just sent it with the. I've had the tractor beam on me. I'm an experiencer contactee and been having experiences since the crib. And one time I was, they gifted me because I kept asking, please show me, stop, being so secretive. I know something's going on. Please show me what's going on. So they took me to a big field and they gave me my own personal close encounters of the third kind type scene, the final scene where they had all the craft go by and then they had a giant, the whole sky was like, the horizon was all hieroglyphs, and it was like scrolling overhead, just like the writing in Star Wars, right? And it was like the most amazing thing. And at the end, I ran down into the valley because I saw two owls or ghosts or something. But when I got close, they were grays, and they were kind of like teasing me. And I ran around the bend, and I got hit in the solar plexus with the beam, and they started to, and then you're frozen. You're being lifted up by your chest basically, and your arms are back. You see that in so many renditions. That's exactly what happened. And at one point, they started to make me go unconscious. I said, "No, stop! I take me consciously. I want to know what's going on." And they ever so gently set me back down, and they said, "We never take you against your will. You always have, free will." And I
right.
said, okay, and then they returned me, back to. And then years later, I went and I found the scene where this encounter was, and it was in California, and it was the place where I met my current husband. It was like magical when I arrived there. It's like, oh, this is where they brought me. What's going to happen this weekend? And that's when I met my current husband. So anyway, that is indeed true. Second point I wanted to talk about, and we can discuss this as I pass the talking stick back to you, is I'm very interested in the Anunnaki Illuminati connection, and I've been studying this for years with my husband, Dr. Sasha Lesson. What are your thoughts on the Order of the Snake, the secret societies, going all the way back to the ancients? Is there an unbroken trail? What were they doing going to the Holy Land and bringing all that stuff back? And where did the Grail go? Where did the what was that box called? Did they communicate with the maybe you know what I'm talking about, the one in Raiders of the
Ark of the Covenant?
Ark of the Covenant, yes. What are your thoughts on all the secret societies and how they manifested up to this day to, Queen Elizabeth and the David Icke stuff? There you go.
Well, gee, how much time do we have? But I'll try to summarize. Well, and the other factor is gold. And if you factor in gold, especially monatomic gold, and the ancient gold mines of South Africa, which Michael Tellinger has done quite a bit of research on and which I recount in Modern Esoteric, you find some of the oldest civilizations on the planet. And the common denominator is they're all around these ancient gold mines. Mm-hmm. And the gold was what the Anunnaki were here for. And they needed a useful idiot, so to speak, to get down in those mines and get them what they need. So they did a little genetic tinkering and created some prototypes of Homo sapien, which in different kind of ways we're still part of today. And I grew up a staunch atheist, evolutionist, and still very much believe in the scientific method and studying scientific breakthroughs and stuff, but there's still a big hole that's missing in the whole story of humanity, this so-called missing link, which will never be found because there isn't one. The missing link is us making this great genetic leap from the proto-humans to what we could term today as modern Homo sapiens in so many various forms, the African, the Oriental, the Caucasian, even the Australian Aboriginal, very early version of the first humans. Then I would say there was a mixture with those survivors of Atlantis and possibly the progenitors of Lemuria. And there were some genes of certain humans who were very advanced at that time, but when there was this so-called fall of man that's been related in so many ancient texts, including the Bible, which talks about the Nephilim as being these masters of humans, you have the first humans taking form, but also with some throwback genetic alterations from these ancient Atlanteans. And I think the smoking gun in all that is this Rh negative blood factor, which is in 15% of all humans on the planet, but it's specifically surrounding most of the European and more specifically Northern European. And the highest incidence of all are the Basque people of northern Spain and southern France, that area of Bay of Biscay where the Iberian Peninsula starts to shoot out west. Those are the oldest survivors, and Edgar Cayce had said that they were the survivors of Atlantis, and they have this highest incident of Rh negative blood factor. Now, you also mentioned the royal family and how that all ties in, and the Windsor family is part of one of these 13 bloodline families, which then trace back many generations, even hundreds of years, even on some timelines all the way back to the pharaohs of Egypt. And keep in mind that they've been in power constantly for all those thousands of years. A pharaoh was a human, but was a living god. And then that power shifted up to Rome. The Caesars were men, but living gods. And now you have the popes living in Rome today. So if you want to know the seat of the bloodline families, it's there. It's the Medici families and many others, which then became fabulous wealthy and still continue to pull the mechanisms of control around the world today.
What do you mean by living God?
Well, the way they were portrayed, both the pharaohs and the Caesars were the ones who could communicate with fourth dimensional entities or above. And just as the Pope is today the one top leading Catholic who has some kind of earphone to God. And this is a tradition that has lasted for hundreds and thousands of years. It just changes its name, it changes its form as humanity changes itself, but it remains to this day.
So isn't that what telepathy is? When people are telepathic and they're psychic, that their transmitter to God is kind of genetically left open, while some people or most people it's shut off. Is that what that
is what I'm alluding to, and I have a chapter in Future Esoteric called Superhuman Abilities where I outline all these different abilities, one of which being telepathy, and the way that they have been able to communicate amongst themselves, maybe with ETs, and even use it as a way to control others. Just a little anecdote, I was backpacking through India in 1993, still pretty young, but had been on the road then for 2 years, and I've heard every scam and seen how they do it. And for some reason, I decided to meet with this guy who was going to triple my money, or I didn't have to put up any money. He brought me to this guy who was extremely telepathic, and I was under a telepathic spell. How do I know that? Because I handed him over all my money, and then they jumped in a cab and disappeared. And then when they left, I'm like, what did I just do? Yeah. So having that perspective, I mean, I got my traveler's checks back. I lost maybe $100, but now in retrospect, it was totally worth it because I fully recall that incident and how this guy made me think what he wanted me to think. and it's very real.
Oh, definitely. Hypnosis is real. My sister-in-law is the head of the International Hypnosis Federation recertification, and she was saying, yeah, they can make you do just about anything. So you were totally mesmerized, hypnotized, and fooled. And, yeah, that's bad. I'm sorry that happened to you.
Yeah.
Wow.
Like I said, in retrospect, it was worth it to have that way of recalling what it was like to be under telepathic spell. And I use that in my research today with understanding exopolitics, the politics above this planet. And that is, what are the motivations of the ET species that are coming here? And it really comes down to two things: service to self and service to others. And those malevolent ETs who are in service to self, such as the Greys and the Reptoids, and maybe even these 13 bloodline families, Anthony Sanchez calls them the Austro-Albus. And it's one and the same with the Illuminati. And these are some data points that are all connecting to this other form of humanity who lives among us and have always been in control. But now we're finally finding out exactly who they are.
So who are they?
Well, you want names?
Yeah.
The Rockefellers is a bloodline family. The Rothschilds are a bloodline family. The Windsors, and then other industrialist families.
You're talking about the 13 families, yeah. Well, apparently I'm part of them. I'm a Crop, KRLCP or KRECP.
Crops, yeah.
Yeah, I'm one of those. I read that David Icke book. I went, oops. But there's the bastard line. There's for those that have their own life for all the money and the power, and then there's the bastards out there. And for some reason, they have a bunch of bastards, like my life. I'm getting a little static here. I'm not sure where it's coming from. It could be coming from me. But Karen and John, can you take over for a few? I gotta do something. I'll be back in like 5 minutes. Okay? I'm gonna mute.
Okay. Yeah, I'm hearing static too. I'm not sure where it's coming from. So we'll just
I think unfortunately it might be my line. I'm trying to render that. Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, try muting it, maybe off and on, and see if that's what's off.
Here we go. I'm on the landline, so you get what you get.
That worked.
Hey, I'm gonna toss it over to John. John, go ahead.
Getting back to being hypnotized, I was the opening speaker at a UFO conference last year, August 28th of last year at Experiencer Speak 4. And I was the opening speaker because the girl who put on the conference, her name is Audrey Starborn Hewins. She knew I would make it very spiritual and ethereal and just create a social milieu that would be very supernatural. So I did that, and so I decided, well, I'm going to do a seance. I'm going to do a seance to see if I can draw angels and or benevolent ETs into our congregation, as I am an ordained minister. And it worked. It worked. And there was over 20 witnesses to this event. I mean, like this, groundbreaking, world-changing event. And I've been trying to get multiple people from MUFON and everybody else to investigate this. Can't get anybody to investigate it. However, Jimmy Church somehow found out about it and got me on his show back in January of this year. And it was a big to-do, but so get this. I'm sitting right next to two blue-skinned extraterrestrials that looked perfectly human except for the fact that their skin was blue. And they did the Jedi mind trick on over 20 of us.
Wow.
And and you talk about being hypnotized. I was sitting there trying to pull out my phone and take a picture because they talked to me the most and they sat right next to me the whole time up until they left. And I'm sitting there, and the guy who did most of the videography for the whole conference, he was going to get his $3,000 camera and take video of them, and we all forgot. I mean, how do you forget to do that? How do you forget to do that? I mean, it was just unbelievable. It was an unbelievable thing. But if you have a chance at Contact in the Desert, ask Jimmy about it.
Oh, I will.
It was a total trip. And
that's cool.
Karen, who is my editor-publicist, we're working on a book about that and other things right now. As all three of us, Janet, Karen, and I, we're full-on experiencers. And, some of the things that happen to us, you just got to put it in writing in a book. So we're working on my second book. But I did want to go to one of your talking points here. Is time travel possible? I guess we can all say yes. But then you go on to say, describe the holographic yellow cube that can interface with the human mind. Can you explain that to us?
Oh, yeah. This is one of the greatest things that was discovered when our scientists, including those scientists that came over from Nazi Germany under Project Paperclip, discovered when they started backward engineering some of the craft, including those that came down in Roswell and New Mexico. And there had been several. And they found this, they called it the yellow cube because it reminded them of the size, and it had this translucent yellow color. It was about the size of a phone book, and it was the ultimate tablet, as you could imagine, because it would interface with your mind. You didn't even have to talk. You could just think your thoughts.
Really?
And you could say, I would like to see a holographic recreation of the Kennedy assassination. Or when it was originally brought out to the generals by the Greys themselves who demonstrated it, they wanted to see the crucifixion of Christ. And it played out holographically, just as a perfect record as it had occurred over 2,000 years ago. And, of course, this blew away the generals. And then they were able to use it to interface other things in history. And when this technology will finally be released, and it will be, because once it starts getting into a couple human hands, it does become somewhat of our collective consciousness. And in a way, if you meditate and think about it a lot, you can start to access your own memories of what it is. That's what's so mind-blowing about this technology. And when it does start to get released into human hands, it does become part of our collective consciousness. So if you were interested, say, on the assassination of JFK, you could freeze frame it. You could see where every bullet came from. You could see who got the kill shot, and then it's the end of the story. So when this technology is released, and I use the metaphor of the age of transparency in my book, Future Esoteric, this will be the end-all, be-all to all conspiracy theories, because we'll talk about the ultimate app. We could all access it on our smartphones, just like the Yellow Cube someday. And this is basically some of the highest technology that has been recovered, even higher than anti-gravity and the free energy devices. Those pretty much became standardized technologies that they could break open and reproduce. But it did take the scientists many decades to fully comprehend the Yellow Cube and its ramifications. Because here's the thing, you can use it to access any event throughout history, not only on our planet, not only in our time as modern humans, but even back to Atlantis or Lemuria. And you can even go off planet with it. And you could look at the history of other planets. So this technology was just so incredible that they had to think about a way that they could use it militarily. Well, you can also use the Yellow Cube to look into the future. And this is a very dangerous tool if it falls in the wrong hands. Why? Because, well, first of all, the future is nothing but a series of probabilities. But those probabilities can be manipulated to make them happen. And it's almost like time, and I talk about timeline 1 and 2 in a chapter in Future Esoteric, is like a river. And the river wants to flow in the direction the river's flowing. But people can divert some of that river and try to make another channel going off here. And that is possible. And this also ties into time travel. And so to use the Yellow Cube to look at future events, they wanted very much to see this timeline 2 scenario happen. And they kept trying to manipulate it so things will happen that it will go the way of the Illuminati and the world control and the New World Order and taking out quite a few human beings, which is a very, very dark side of it. But the most probable future that humans have is timeline 1, and that's where the body of the river is flowing. And they kept trying to alter it to go into timeline 2 to create these little channels off stream. But the river is forceful enough to keep going forward, and they haven't been able to pull off a World War III yet. And they have tried. They have tried many times. But there are benevolent ETs who will not allow that to happen. Now, they don't want to just show up on the White House lawn and announce themselves. In fact, they can't do that because it's along the lines of the Prime Directive. Like the abduction scenario. If you say, I will not consent to this, you have free will and you will be returned. But if people are curious and just want to go along for the ride, then maybe they will have access to do what they want with you. So how this applies to the yellow cube today, it was said that Saddam Hussein had an ancient time travel device, much like a yellow cube, but more like a Stargate. And that was the real reason he had to be taken out. And that was the first thing they went and did, is went to the archives under the Baghdad Museum, and that's where we set up. The first thing we did when we got to Baghdad. And they went in right away to go and acquire that technology. That's really why they had to go in there.
I knew it, Brad.
Yep.
Yeah, oh, that's brilliant, man. I've known that all along, but you explained it better than I think I've ever heard it before. So that was excellent commentary. Karen, you got a question?
No, I have a comment on the commentary. I'm a time anomalist. Amongst other things, I study time anomalies. I have personal experiences of being aware of alternative timelines and knowing this thing that you're talking about, the mainline number 1, mainline number 2, and Janet's talked about there's 24 other options, and some people even think there's even more different potentialities. I just have a lot of friends that are timeline aware and or time travelers, as a matter of fact, or have had time anomalies thrust upon them by our military, by the way. So I'm with you, and I'm very fascinated with the fact that the persistency of timeline number 1, and I'm going to tell you something. I don't often talk about my contact experiences and downloads too much. I'm going to talk about them, but this is one that's kind of fresh off the docket, right, where one of my contacts told me to look at the last century, and that was a huge attempt at mass genocide with the atomic bomb, and in the early part of the century, the chemical warfare. I mean, they were trying all these toys, as it were, military-type toys, to wipe out large segments of the population, and yet by the end of the 20th century, the population actually doubled. I mean, it tripled. I mean, it just went off the docket. Many more humans were born, and that's because we have a biommind that determines if we're under threat, just like any other species. If it's under threat, it's gonna a mass death or something. It's gonna really push up its population numbers up. And then they told me this century is about control of things like you're talking about, these technologies. In other words, they're trying to, if they can't kill us all, they're going to try to control us with mind control, devices and technology, and even involved with our how we use telecommunication, and we're reporting on ourselves through Facebook, this kind of thing. And if the population doubled in the last century as a result of responding to this attempt at mass murder, basically, and genocide, what's going to happen if they try to control us through new technology? And I said, it just popped into my head, they're going to lose control. They're going to lose control. And I'm getting static, it's very interesting. But the idea is that the consciousness, our consciousness is so much more powerful than our technology. Our technology is trying to catch up with our consciousness, really. We're very spiritual beings. We're spiritual beings having a human experience, and our technology is really teaching us about our consciousness. And so all of this is like training wheels. All the things we do with technology is like training wheels for us to understand or remember what we've always been able to do and who we are. So I just wanted to throw that out because I thought it was really interesting when you were talking about the timeline. So I really think the timeline one is unstoppable. I used to be very pessimistic in the first part of my, existence on Earth because I was in a religious modality that believed in, Armageddon and all that kind of stuff. And then now I made the choice to be optimistic and say, well, it hasn't happened yet. I've known about this has been told to me since I was very young. All these horrible things are going to happen, and some horrible things did happen. But I feel I've chosen to be optimistic, so now I see reasons to be optimistic. In other words, now I see the timeline one how powerful it truly is. And so I urge people, if you're scared or freaked out about time technologies, time is freaky, because they really are trying to bring about, those outcomes. But to be honest, I'm with you. Timeline 1 is happening. It's going to happen. They're learning a lot, I suppose, of taking the other track, but it's all part of the educational process that eventually benefits us in the end. So that's just what I wanted to throw out right there. I don't know.
Yeah,
Janet,
beautifully said.
Janet? Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead, Brad.
Oh, thank you for that. That was very insightful. And I agree with you. This is going to be the century of control, and they're going to try to do it in so many different ways. And this even kind of goes into sorcery and some black magic type abilities they're going to try to throw upon us. First of all, I think we're all in agreement that television is the greatest form of mind control that was ever invented. And they're able to put thought patterns into the greater collective consciousness. And it's really dubious the way they do it and try to keep us in a fear state. That's part of the control. If people are in a state of fear and anger and paranoia all the time, then they're a lot more malleable. They're a lot more easily suggestible that immigrants invading, we need wall. Think in very basic terms. Like the low information voter. Think in very just simplistic terms. When you're afraid, when you can let go of fear and let go of the anger, because a lot of these things, very rightfully so, make us angry, but we can't give in to that because that is the game they want us to fall into. It's just like trying to go up against these forces fire with fire. Forget about it. We'll get slaughtered. The only way this is going to happen, and the tagline on the back of Modern Esoteric is, the revolution is consciousness. We're only going to make these great changes when we start getting other people around us to start to wake up to the manipulation and the control that's been enforced upon us. And then you're right, we have the numbers, and we will rise up, and then their game is over. That is going to be the great moment when humanity then can enter the golden age.
Oh, we're going to have Janet. Okay, John, go ahead and pick your next question.
So a comment, and then a couple comments, and then I'll spin it into a question for you, Brad. So you were saying that if you're visited by extraterrestrials and you vehemently deny them access, then I guess most of the time they're going to leave you alone. But in my case, I invite loving, benevolent ETs to come into my life as much as humanly possible, and surround myself with protective godlight, and do a lot of protocols for spiritual protection, which a lot of people forget to do before they enter the astral plane. They don't even enter their mind, but you should always do that. It's just a rule of thumb. But anyway, I do it all the time. And it does play into me being a lifelong experiencer, and the experiences that I have, the encounters I have, the CE5s I have are just increasing exponentially, which is great. I love it. So I told you about the conference with the Blue Beings. Well, Audrey Hewins, the lady that put on the conference, I met her mother at the conference, but then she came down to Orlando for a MUFON meeting. And Denise Stoner, I don't know if you know Denise Stoner, and Kathy Martin. Anyway, they're big players with MUFON and ufology. They do a lot of speaking around the country at these different conferences. But anyway, they were there, and they were good friends with Audrey Hewins' mother, Nancy Hewins. And I ran into Nancy, and I really didn't have a chance to talk to her at the conference, but I got to talk to her at this MUFON meeting at length. And she's just a beautiful person. I can see lights over her head. I could see angels all around her the whole time that we were in that same room. It was pretty amazing. Nice. And she hugged me and said, I'm a hugger. Give me a hug. And, hopefully I see you at the conference again this year. But we talked about the Blue Beings for probably 20 minutes, which was really cool. And then that night I come home. I'm by myself. I don't even really remember what I was doing. But I black out. But before I blacked out, there was all this very low-flying air surveillance, which happens to me all the time, especially when I know that there's craft in the area. But they did it before anything actually happened to me. So I wake up on my couch and my front door is wide open, which I never do. You know, I would never leave my front door wide open, but my front door was wide open, and I woke up and I had just had a dream about the blue beings. And the next day I call Karen and I tell her, I'm like, how come there was so much air surveillance, like low-flying drones, low-flying unmarked white Cessnas with no catalog numbers on the wings, which, you know, you have to, according to the FAA. And then also you got to take into consideration their flight patterns. You know, that was an FAA registered flight pattern over my house, a couple hundred feet over my house. Why do they fly that low? Because if they fly higher, that's where all your commercial aircraft are flying. So this surveillance stuff goes on over my house all the time. And I said, Karen, why was all this surveillance activity going on before the UFO showed up? And she said, because the powers that be were already able to tap into the timeline, and they knew that this was going to happen to you. So they were setting up camp. They were setting up camp, waiting for them to come. And I'm like, wow, that actually made a whole lot of sense. And then about a week or two ago, I have this dream, and I'm going to cut it real short. But in the dream, somebody's trying to kill me. And they're pointing a gun at me. They're about to shoot me. And then all of a sudden, I wake up. And whatever happened, I ejected some kind of archon outside of my body. And and then I started to think about it more and more and more. I started to not try to think about it, but allow the information to come to me. And what came to me is that this, what I call extra dimensional, not exactly sure what it was, an archon, spirit being, an energetic ET that didn't have a physical body, not exactly sure. But I could feel that it was using my soul to astrally travel to a different timeline in which I was already there. So maybe in this other timeline, this extra dimensional was a tree, or was a rabbit, or was something not as significant or as intelligent as an intelligent being. And so if they see that you, in a concentric lifetime, are in a time loop that they want to get into, that they can astrally travel through you, but I was able to eject this before it could travel through me any further. Have you ever heard of anything like that before? Oh,
yeah. I was going to jump in and say I have some information for you guys.
Oh,
people
please.
On this planet who have psi power, PSI, psychic abilities, experiencers like yourselves, anybody who's starting to perceive the extra dimensions that you spoke of, they pose a threat to these malevolent service to self ETs. And they are actively attempting to suppress us. And they will do things like dreams, and I've had many myself. And you basically have to insist they go away and continue to bring the light beings into your existence, because they will help. But this is something that is going on the psychic level and in the multidimensional multiverse out there. And the people who are awakening on this planet are going through a lot of hard times right now, and are feeling the pressure because they need to keep us down. If we keep rising up and our numbers are increasing, it's game over for them, because then we get to that critical mass of 10% or so, and the 100th monkey effect could happen within the human species in an instant. And then you're going to have an enlightened race of humans who will just start seeing through all this stuff. And these dark archon network forces, they can't be here when our vibration rises that much. So while they still have that opportunity to suppress those people with psi power, they will do so, and they continue to do so. And I think we all have our own experiences dealing with that.
I knew that you would be able to resonate with what I was saying. You know, as scientific as you are, I knew that you had very much a very vast right brain also. So I wouldn't have spun that question at just any of our guests, but I knew you could answer it, and you answered it better than better than I expected. Not better, but it just, I don't know, you informed me more than I thought I was already informed about it. So excellent answer. So, hey, we got to be wrapping up here in the next 8 or 10 minutes. Is there any talking points that you'd like to touch on? We'll give you the floor for the remainder of the show if you'd like it.
Sure. Well, just want to say a big thank you to you guys. I can tell we're all in the same mindset here. We've all been brought here for a reason. We signed up for this job. We're here to do a major advancement, collectively bringing up the vibration of this planet. And by doing so, we're going to do an incredible amount of good, probably the most good we've done in many lifetimes. And that's why we're here, and that's why we're putting up with so much. But we got a job to do. We're going to do it. This is going to be the greatest moment in human history to be alive. And to even have just a small part in it, like you guys do, the radio show, as I do with my books, it's the best we can do. And we're doing it in a nonviolent way. We're doing it in a way that's going to increase the consciousness of this planet. And if I don't see you guys in this lifetime, we're going to meet up afterwards, and we're going to review these things, aka the Yellow Book, and we're going to see how much incredible good this is going to do for the human race from here on out. And to your listeners out there, just have faith. This is it. This is really showtime right now, everybody. And it's very important that you live in a very purified state. This is true with what you eat and consume in your life and what you think about on a daily basis. This is truly critical to stay positive, remain focused, and have love in your heart for yourself, for the people around you, for the whole planet, for the animals and the plants and even the minerals. This is it. Right now, we are going through the greatest shift of consciousness that has happened in a long time, not only in the world, but in the universe. And this is really the greatest show in the universe. And there are so many eyeballs and so much even entities that we can't even imagine in the multi-dimensions that are watching us right now to make this happen, because we're going to pull through this. It's going to be a tough ride. It's the darkest hour before the dawn. But when it happens, boy, are we going to be amazed at how quickly the human race is going to evolve. We just have to get over a couple speed bumps here, and we will. It will happen. The New World Order will fail. We're going to go right up to the precipice with this, and all these control mechanisms are going to be in place and are going to do their best to suppress those with psi power, and they're going to do things with HARP and weather control and those frequencies and vibrations, but in a malevolent way. I mean, look around us. We got these cell phone towers all over the place now. We don't know what they can do to us, and it's going to be very hard. But persevere, stay positive, stay focused, keep your eye on the prize, and that prize is the golden age. And we will be witness to one of the greatest shifts in consciousness that any planet and any species has ever experienced for a long, long time. This is it. I mean, we're coming into the grandest period, and I can't stop enforcing that notion that we're just at the light before the dawn. So keep the faith, everybody. Stay positive and love yourself and love the people around you, and just keep that positive vibration going as best you can in the world, because every little bit helps. Every little conscious act, pay it forward, give change to the homeless, it's all good. Just be positive in everything you do and all your actions and all your thoughts. Hard stop.
Oh, wow, that
Karen,
was
anything?
awesome.
Yeah, wasn't that good, man?
Oh, man, that was going to jump up.
That was great.
Yeah. Oh, and I like to reiterate what you're saying about we're being watched all over the cosmos. I call it the True Man Show. We're very interesting to everyone because we're going through this process, right? But I want to make sure we know what's going on with you and Contact in the Desert. It is Contact in the Desert, right? And you're going to be speaking. And what should people be looking for from you at this event?
Okay, well, I'm giving a presentation called Everything is Fake. I want people to wake up to the fact that we've been manipulated for a very long time and give them the insight to how this manipulation is happening so they can pretty much call it out when they see it. If people want to learn more about me, you can go to bradolsen.com, spell my last name Olsen. And if you want to read my books and get a signed copy, go to www.cccpublishing.com. That's 3 C's in publishing. And those books go through my office here in San Francisco. And that's a way to also get in touch with me if you feel compelled to shoot me off an email or just say hello.
Okay, wonderful. John, sometimes my feed cuts out, so I just want to be sure to say thank you to you, Brad. And thanks for coming on here. I feel like a real great pep talk just happened. I'm excited. It's really exciting. I hope people get, even though you're saying everything's fake, they get that vibe that, yes, everything's fake, but there's something that's real, right? And, John, you got any further comments? And just want to thank you, Brad. And I'll be checking out your website. I looked at it earlier today. I thought it was great. Go ahead, John.
All right. So Brad Olsen with an en.com, cccpublishing.com, esotericseries.com, stompers.com, howweird.org, and peacetour.org. Is there any other websites, links, or YouTube videos or anything you'd like to share with us before we let you go?
Yeah, I do have a YouTube channel called Esoteric Series, and Modern Esoteric and Future Esoteric are my most recent books just in the last year and two. And I invite people to come onto the CCC Publishing website and check those books out for free. Even if you can't afford to buy one or want to just browse, I allow 100% of my books to be read using the Google Books app on each of those individual book pages on CCC Publishing. So a lot of the things that I talked about today you can access in my books, and I look forward to meeting anybody who's listening if they're coming out to Contact in the Desert. I speak on the first day, kind of late morning, so I'll get my shift over with soon, which I kind of prefer. And then I'll have time to meet and hang out with some of the great minds that are going to be at this event.
Yeah, say hi to Jimmy Church for me. I met him at the Alien Snow Fest and hung out with him the whole time. Him and his wife are great people. But, Janet's going to be there too, and so is Les Johnson, producer for Fade to Black, and a number of other people. So you're going to have a great time. I'm jealous. Wish I could go, but I'm spending all my money on my next publication. So I guess you know how that goes too.
I do indeed, and shoot me any email if you want some advice on publishing, or maybe I can steer you to the right people to make that happen for you, John.
Okay, I appreciate it. Karen and I will follow up as she is my publicist and editor, but we appreciate all your time and